I didn't expect anything unusual when I pulled into her driveway that night, just the familiar sag of the old house and the porch light flickering like it always did when rain started coming down hard, the kind of rain that erased edges and made the world feel smaller, closer, heavier. Her brother, my best friend since high school, had texted earlier, apologetic as always, asking if I could swing by and look at the water heater because she'd called him upset and he was stuck 2 towns over on a work emergency. I'd fixed that heater twice before, so I grabbed my tools and went, thinking I'd be in and out in an hour. She opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching for headlights, wearing an oversized hoodie that slipped off one shoulder, barefoot on the cold tile, eyes rimmed red not from crying exactly but from being tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. For a second we just looked at each other, rain hammering the porch roof, and something about the quiet between us felt heavier than usual. She stepped aside without a word, and the house smelled faintly of damp laundry and lavender soap, familiar and strangely intimate. The basement light flickered as I went down, concrete steps cold and slick, the water heater sitting there like a stubborn old animal refusing to cooperate, sputtering and clicking without catching. I knelt, checked the pilot, muttered under my breath, aware of her presence at the top of the stairs even when she wasn't speaking. She filled the silence with small talk that wasn't really small, complaints about her job, a neighbor who kept parking too close, how the rain always made her anxious, and I realized she wasn't talking to pass time, she was talking to keep something else at bay. When I finally got the pilot lit, and the tank started warming, the relief in her sigh was real but short-lived, like she'd been bracing for something bigger than cold water. Upstairs, we stood awkwardly in the kitchen, steam beginning to fog the windows as hot water moved through old pipes, and that was when she looked at me, not directly but close enough, and said quietly, "Don't let me stay up alone tonight." There was no smile, no teasing edge, no attempt to make it sound lighter than it was. Just a statement, almost a request, hanging between us like a held breath, and in that moment I understood this wasn't about attraction or crossing lines, it was about fear, about nights that stretched too long when there was no one else around to remind you that you were safe, that you existed. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded once, slowly, because words felt clumsy and unnecessary, and something in her shoulders loosened like she'd been holding herself together with tension alone. Part 2. We didn't make a big deal out of it after that, didn't announce what we were doing or why, just moved into the living room like it was the most natural thing in the world, sitting at opposite ends of the couch at first, rain still tapping insistently against the windows, the television off, the house breathing around us in old familiar sounds. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea she barely drank, staring at the surface like answers might float up if she waited long enough, and little by little she talked, not all at once, not dramatically, but in fragments that added up to something heavy. She talked about nights when her thoughts spiraled, about lying awake convinced something terrible was about to happen without knowing what, about how everyone thought she was the strong one because she always sounded calm on the phone. I listened, really listened, not interrupting, not trying to fix it with advice or jokes, just being there. The way I'd learned sometimes mattered more. At some point she laughed softly at a stupid memory from when we were younger, her brother breaking a window and blaming the dog, and the sound surprised both of us, fragile but real. The rain eased into a steady whisper, and the house felt warmer, safer, the heater humming steadily in the background like proof that some problems could actually be solved. She eventually curled up on the couch, exhaustion finally winning, eyes closing mid-sentence, and I draped a blanket over her without waking her, careful not to touch more than I had to, respecting the invisible lines we both knew existed. I stayed awake in the armchair across from her, phone dark, tools still by the door, listening to her breathing even out, thinking about how strange and simple it was to matter to someone in that quiet way. When morning light finally crept through the curtains, pale and forgiving, she stirred and looked at me with a small, embarrassed smile, thanking me like I'd done something extraordinary when all I'd really done was stay. I left soon after, stepping back into a world that felt louder and sharper than it had the night before, knowing nothing between us had changed in a way that needed explaining, and yet everything felt subtly different, like we'd crossed into a deeper understanding that didn't require words. Just the knowledge that sometimes being there is the most important repair you can make.